In October 1889, a groundskeeper's shovel struck something that would haunt Millbrook County for generations. What Samuel Hendricks unearthed behind the abandoned Ravenswood Sunday School wasn't tree roots or forgotten farming equipment, but the skeletal remains of what appeared to be a child. Within hours, local authorities had cordoned off the property, and within days, they had counted 143 small graves scattered across the wooded area behind the modest white building that had once been considered a beacon of Christian charity. The Millbrook County Sheriff's Department, in coordination with state officials, immediately sealed all records related to the discovery. Between 1863 and 1867, over 143 children had been entrusted to the care of Reverend Ezekiel Ravenswood and his family through their Sunday school program for wayward and orphaned youth. What the authorities tried to bury for over 2 decades can no longer remain hidden, and the true nature of the Ravenswood family's charitable work demands exposure. Before we descend into this horrifying chapter of American history, this story isn't for everyone. Only those brave enough to confront the darkest secrets of religious institutions should continue. If you're ready to join our community of truth seekers who refuse to let these victims be forgotten, hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments what state you're listening from. This investigation into one of the most disturbing cover-ups in American religious history will challenge everything you thought you knew about faith and trust. The Ravenswood Sunday School sat on 12 acres of rolling hills just outside Millbrook, Pennsylvania, a farming community where everyone knew their neighbors and trusted their local religious leaders without question. Reverend Ezekiel Ravenswood had arrived in Millbrook in 1862 with his wife Martha, their 3 adult children, and a letter of recommendation from a Presbyterian congregation in Ohio that praised his dedication to charitable work with disadvantaged youth. The Civil War had created unprecedented numbers of orphans and displaced children, and communities across Pennsylvania were struggling to care for these vulnerable souls. Ezekiel Ravenswood was a commanding presence, standing well over 6 feet tall with piercing blue eyes and a voice that could fill any room without effort. His sermons on Sunday mornings drew families from miles around, and his passionate calls for Christian charity resonated deeply with a community watching their young men march off to war. Martha Ravenswood complemented her husband perfectly, organizing the women's auxiliary and coordinating the collection of food and clothing for needy families. Their eldest son, Samuel, had studied medicine in Philadelphia before returning to assist with the family's charitable mission. Daughter Rebecca managed the school's daily operations with remarkable efficiency, while youngest son Isaac handled the property's maintenance and expansion. The Sunday school program began modestly in the spring of 1863, accepting 12 children whose parents had died in the war or from disease. Local families contributed generously to support the program, donating food, clothing, and money to ensure these children received proper Christian education and care. The Ravenswood family's dedication impressed everyone, and word of their charitable work spread throughout the region. By winter, they were caring for over 30 children, and construction had begun on dormitory buildings to accommodate the growing numbers. What made the Ravenswood program particularly appealing to authorities was their willingness to accept the most difficult cases. Other charitable institutions often rejected children with behavioral problems, learning difficulties, or those who had been living on the streets. The Ravenswoods welcomed these challenging cases, claiming that with proper Christian guidance and firm discipline, any child could be reformed and prepared for productive citizenship. They charged no fees for their services, instead relying entirely on community donations and what they called voluntary contributions from families who could afford them. The children who arrived at the Sunday school came from various backgrounds, but they shared common characteristics that made them particularly vulnerable. Most were orphans with no extended family to check on their welfare. Others came from families so poor that parents viewed the program as their children's only hope for survival and education. Some were immigrants whose families spoke little English and had limited understanding of American institutions. A few were what authorities called problem children, removed from other charitable institutions for behavioral issues or sent by overwhelmed parents who could no longer manage them. Parents and guardians who entrusted children to the Ravenswood program were told that education and reformation took time, often years, and that contact with former influences could undermine the children's progress. Visitors were discouraged during the first year, and correspondence was carefully monitored to ensure that outside influences didn't disrupt the careful work of moral reformation. The Ravenwoods explained that children needed to form new attachments and learn new habits before they could safely maintain relationships with their past lives. The program's apparent success attracted attention from state officials who were struggling with the enormous numbers of displaced children created by the war. In 1864, the Pennsylvania State Board of Charities formally recognized the Ravenswood Sunday School as an approved charitable institution, allowing them to receive state funding and accept children from across the region. This official recognition brought increased legitimacy and additional resources, enabling the family to expand their facilities and accept even more children. Local community members who occasionally visited the school reported seeing well-behaved children engaged in appropriate educational and religious activities. The children appeared clean, properly dressed, and respectful toward their caretakers. Visitors noted the orderly nature of the program and the obvious dedication of the Ravenswood family to their charitable mission. These positive reports reinforced the community's support and encouraged additional donations to sustain the growing program. However, careful observers might have noticed subtle details that suggested all was not as it appeared. Children at the school rarely made eye contact with visitors and spoke only when directly addressed. Their responses seemed rehearsed, lacking the natural spontaneity expected from young people. The property itself, while well maintained, featured unusually high fences and gates that remained locked during daylight hours. The Ravenwoods explained these security measures as necessary to prevent children from wandering off and getting lost in the surrounding wilderness. The family's explanation for the absence of former students was equally carefully crafted. Successful graduates, they claimed, were placed in apprenticeships or domestic service positions throughout Pennsylvania and neighboring states. The program's effectiveness was measured not by maintaining contact with former students, but by their successful integration into productive society. Parents and guardians who inquired about specific children were told that continued contact might undermine the young person's progress in their new life, and that the kindest thing was to allow them to build fresh relationships unburdened by past associations. As 1863 drew to a close, the Ravenswood Sunday School had established itself as one of the region's most respected charitable institutions. The family's dedication to their mission impressed everyone who encountered their work, and their willingness to accept the most challenging cases earned them particular admiration from overwhelmed authorities. What no one yet understood was that the Ravenswood family's charitable work served purposes far darker than anyone in Millbrook could have imagined, and that the children who disappeared into their care were about to become part of a systematic operation that would continue for 4 horrifying years. The Ravenswood family's arrival in Millbrook had been orchestrated with remarkable precision, though none of the welcoming townspeople recognized the calculated nature of their new neighbors' integration strategy. Ezekiel Ravenswood had spent months researching Pennsylvania communities before selecting Millbrook, studying census records, church registrations, and local newspaper reports to identify the perfect location for his family's operations. He needed a town large enough to provide cover and resources, but small enough that his family could quickly establish themselves as respected community leaders. The letter of recommendation from Ohio was genuine, written by Reverend Thomas Mitchell of the First Presbyterian Church of Marietta, who had worked closely with Ezekiel for 3 years. What Mitchell didn't know when he penned his glowing endorsement was that 14 children who had been placed in Ezekiel's care during that period had simply vanished, their disappearances explained away as successful placements with distant families or tragic accidents that befell runaway youth. Mitchell's own records showed these children as successfully graduated from the program, their files marked with forwarding addresses that led nowhere and employment references that proved impossible to verify. Martha Ravenswood's integration into Millbrook society proved even more effective than her husband's religious leadership. Within months of their arrival, she had established herself as the community's most reliable organizer of charitable activities, coordinating relief efforts for families affected by the war and managing the collection of supplies for local soldiers. Her efficiency and dedication impressed the town's established families, who quickly invited her into their social circles and relied on her expertise for organizing everything from church socials to harvest festivals. The three Ravenswood children played crucial roles in establishing the family's credibility and expanding their reach throughout the community. Samuel's medical training made him invaluable in a town that had lost its only doctor to military service, and his willingness to treat patients regardless of their ability to pay earned him widespread admiration. Rebecca's skill with children and her apparent devotion to education led to her appointment as the town's Sunday school coordinator, giving her access to detailed information about every family's circumstances and challenges. Isaac's mechanical aptitude and willingness to help with construction projects made him popular among the town's craftsmen and farmers, while providing him with intimate knowledge of the area's geography and transportation routes. The family's Sunday school program grew organically from their established reputation and the community's genuine need for assistance with displaced children. Local families had been struggling to care for war orphans and children from families devastated by economic hardship, and the Ravenwoods' offer to provide comprehensive care and education seemed like an answer to prayer. The program's religious foundation appealed to the community's strong Presbyterian values, while the family's emphasis on discipline and moral instruction aligned perfectly with prevailing attitudes about child rearing and social responsibility. What made the Ravenswood operation particularly insidious was how perfectly it addressed real community needs while serving the family's hidden purposes. The children they accepted were genuinely in need of care, and the families who entrusted them to the program were making decisions based on love and desperation rather than neglect or indifference. Parents who gave up their children to the Sunday school program believed they were providing opportunities their own circumstances couldn't offer, including education, proper nutrition, and training for future employment. The program's intake process appeared thorough and professional, with detailed interviews, documentation of the child's background and circumstances, and clear agreements about the terms of care and education. Parents were required to sign legal documents transferring temporary guardianship to the Ravenswood family, with provisions for the child's eventual placement in appropriate employment or continued education. These documents, meticulously maintained in Rebecca's careful handwriting, created an impressive paper trail that satisfied both legal requirements and parental concerns about their children's welfare. If you're feeling chilled by how systematically this family infiltrated and manipulated an entire community, you're beginning to understand the true horror of what happened in Millbrook. This kind of calculated evil doesn't emerge overnight. It develops through careful planning and ruthless exploitation of human decency. Share this video with someone who appreciates true crime investigations, and don't forget to hit that like button to help us continue exposing these forgotten chapters of American history. The physical expansion of the Sunday school property reflected the program's apparent success and growing reputation. Throughout 1863 and into 1864, construction projects continually expanded the facility's capacity, with new dormitory buildings, workshop spaces, and educational facilities rising on the property's 12 acres. Local craftsmen donated labor and materials for these projects, proud to contribute to such an obviously worthy cause and impressed by Isaac Ravenswood's skill in coordinating the complex construction efforts. The children themselves became unwitting advertisements for the program's effectiveness, their transformation from often desperate circumstances to apparent health and good behavior impressing everyone who encountered them. During supervised visits to town for supplies or church services, they demonstrated the kind of respectful behavior and educational progress that validated the community's investment in the program. Their neat appearance, polite demeanor, and obvious attachment to their caretakers suggested that the Ravenswood method of charitable care was achieving remarkable results with even the most challenging cases. However, beneath this carefully maintained facade, the true nature of the Ravenswood operation was beginning to emerge through patterns that would only become clear in retrospect. The children who thrived in public were invariably those who had arrived most recently, while longer-term residents of the program seemed to fade into the background of daily operations. The family's explanations for this pattern focused on the natural progression of their educational program, with advanced students taking on more responsibilities and spending less time in public activities as they prepared for their eventual placement in employment or apprenticeships. The Ravenswood family's success in Millbrook demonstrated their sophisticated understanding of community psychology and their ability to exploit the very best impulses of decent people for their own horrific purposes. By the spring of 1864, the Ravenswood family had refined their operational methods into a systematic process that balanced maximum efficiency with minimal risk of detection. Their approach to selecting and processing victims demonstrated a level of calculated cruelty that transformed what appeared to be charitable work into something far more sinister. The family had learned from their previous experiences in Ohio and other locations, developing techniques that eliminated the mistakes and oversights that had occasionally raised uncomfortable questions about their earlier operations. The victim selection process began long before any child arrived at the Sunday school property. Rebecca Ravenswood's position as the community Sunday school coordinator provided her with detailed intelligence about every family's circumstances, financial struggles, and personal challenges. She maintained careful records of which families had lost fathers to the war, which mothers were struggling with too many children and insufficient resources, and which immigrants were most isolated from community support networks. This information allowed the family to identify potential victims months before making any direct approach. Samuel Ravenswood's medical practice provided another crucial source of intelligence about vulnerable children. His house calls to treat sick family members gave him opportunities to assess family dynamics, economic circumstances, and the presence or absence of extended family support. Children who showed signs of chronic illness, developmental delays, or behavioral problems were particularly attractive targets, as their eventual disappearance could be more easily explained as natural consequences of their underlying conditions. Samuel's medical knowledge also enabled him to identify children whose health problems might make them unsuitable for certain types of exploitation, allowing the family to match victims to specific purposes within their broader operation. Isaac Ravenswood's construction and maintenance work throughout the region provided the family with detailed knowledge of transportation routes, isolated locations, and the seasonal patterns of local agriculture and commerce. His familiarity with rural properties and abandoned buildings created a network of potential disposal sites and temporary holding facilities that could be utilized when necessary. Isaac's reputation as a reliable craftsman also gave him access to tools, equipment, and materials that served the family's operational needs while maintaining the appearance of legitimate construction and maintenance activities. The approach to potential victims followed carefully scripted patterns designed to minimize resistance and maximize cooperation from both children and their families. Initial contact usually came through Martha Ravenswood's charitable activities, presented as assistance rather than recruitment for the Sunday school program. Families received help with immediate needs like food, clothing, or medical care before any mention was made of educational opportunities for their children. This approach created feelings of gratitude and obligation that made families more receptive to suggestions about their children's futures. Ezekiel Ravenswood's role in the recruitment process leveraged his religious authority and apparent concern for children's spiritual welfare. His conversations with parents emphasized the moral dangers facing children in poverty, the corrupting influences of street life, and the eternal consequences of inadequate Christian education. He presented the Sunday school program as rescue rather than charity, suggesting that parents who truly loved their children would make whatever sacrifices necessary to ensure their spiritual and temporal salvation. This approach transformed parental guilt and desperation into motivation for cooperation with the family's plans. The intake process itself was designed to sever connections between children and their previous lives as completely as possible. New arrivals underwent what was described as quarantine period, supposedly to prevent the spread of disease but actually to begin the psychological conditioning that would make them more manageable and less likely to attempt escape or contact with their families. During this isolation, children received new clothing, had their hair cut in standardized styles, and were assigned new daily routines that bore no resemblance to their previous lives. Children who arrived at the Sunday school were immediately sorted into categories based on their perceived value and potential utility. The most physically attractive and mentally capable children were designated for what the family termed special education, receiving additional attention and training that prepared them for specific purposes within the broader operation. Children with useful skills or particular physical characteristics were assigned to appropriate work details that maximized their contribution to the family's various enterprises. Those deemed less valuable were relegated to general labor and maintenance duties that kept the property functioning while providing minimal return on the resources invested in their care. The family's psychological manipulation of victims began immediately upon arrival and continued throughout their time at the facility. Children were told that their families had abandoned them, that no one outside the Sunday school cared about their welfare, and that their survival depended entirely on pleasing their new caretakers. Those who showed signs of resistance or attempted to maintain connections with their previous lives faced increasingly severe punishments designed to break their will and eliminate any hope of rescue or escape. The operational methods also included sophisticated systems for managing information and maintaining operational security. All correspondence between the facility and outside parties was carefully screened and often rewritten to convey approved messages while concealing the true nature of daily life at the Sunday school. Visitors to the property saw only what the family wanted them to see, with carefully orchestrated demonstrations of the program's apparent success and strategic concealment of anything that might raise uncomfortable questions. The Ravenswood family's growing confidence in their methods led to increasingly ambitious expansion of their operations throughout 1864 and into 1865. The success of their victim selection and processing techniques convinced them that they had developed a sustainable model that could be scaled up to handle much larger numbers of children while maintaining the appearance of legitimate charitable work. This confidence would prove to be the foundation for the systematic elimination of 143 innocent lives over the following years, as the family's appetite for victims grew alongside their operational capabilities. The evolution of the Ravenswood family's methodology during 1864 and 1865 demonstrated their ability to learn from experience and adapt their techniques to maximize both profit and operational security. What had begun as a relatively crude operation in Ohio had transformed into a sophisticated enterprise that combined multiple revenue streams with carefully managed risk factors. The family's success in Millbrook provided them with the confidence and resources necessary to refine their approach and develop new categories of exploitation that had not been possible in their previous locations. The establishment of victim selection criteria became increasingly scientific as the family accumulated experience with different types of children and their respective values within the broader operation. Physical appearance played a crucial role in determining each child's ultimate fate, with particularly attractive children reserved for what Samuel Ravenswood euphemistically called special clientele who paid premium prices for access to specific types of victims. Children with unusual physical characteristics, whether particularly beautiful features or distinctive coloring, commanded higher prices and received different treatment designed to maintain their appearance and appeal to discriminating buyers. Intelligence and educational background became equally important factors in the selection process, as the family discovered lucrative markets for children who could serve as companions, tutors, or assistants to wealthy families in distant cities. These children underwent intensive training in proper speech, manners, and domestic skills that made them valuable commodities in households that required sophisticated servants but preferred to avoid the legal complications associated with hiring free adults. The family's ability to provide seemingly legitimate documentation for these placements eliminated many of the risks typically associated with human trafficking operations. Age became a critical factor in determining both the methods of exploitation and the duration of each victim's utility to the operation. Very young children were often held for several years while their value increased through training and physical development, with careful attention paid to nutrition and health care that maintained their marketability. Older children who arrived with existing skills or education were processed more quickly, either sold immediately to appropriate buyers or utilized in supporting roles within the Sunday school operation itself. Medical knowledge, particularly Samuel's expertise, enabled the family to identify children with specific health conditions that made them suitable for particular types of exploitation. Children with chronic illnesses were often used for medical experimentation, with Samuel conducting procedures and treatments that generated both financial compensation from interested physicians and valuable experience that enhanced his own medical reputation. Children with mental or emotional challenges were frequently subjected to psychological experiments designed to test various theories about behavior modification and mind control techniques. The family's internal hierarchy evolved to maximize efficiency and minimize the risk of exposure through specialized roles and carefully defined responsibilities. Ezekiel maintained overall strategic control while focusing on community relations and the recruitment of new victims through his religious authority. Martha managed the day-to-day operations of the facility while coordinating with buyers and clients who required ongoing access to specific children. Samuel handled all medical aspects of the operation while maintaining his legitimate practice as cover for his more lucrative activities. Rebecca's role expanded beyond simple record-keeping to include sophisticated intelligence gathering and analysis that informed the family's strategic decisions about victim selection and operational expansion. Her position in the community provided access to detailed information about potential victims, while her administrative skills enabled the family to maintain the complex documentation required to support their various cover stories and false identities for processed children. Isaac's responsibilities grew to include not only property maintenance and security but also transportation and disposal services that were essential to the operation's continued success. His knowledge of regional geography and transportation networks enabled the family to move victims, clients, and evidence efficiently while minimizing the risk of detection by authorities or suspicious community members. The development of multiple revenue streams demonstrated the family's business acumen and their understanding of market opportunities created by the social disruption of the Civil War era. Direct sales of children to buyers in distant cities provided immediate cash income while generating minimal ongoing risk once the transactions were completed. Long-term rental arrangements with wealthy clients who preferred ongoing access to specific children created steady income streams while maintaining the family's control over valuable assets. Medical experimentation generated income from physicians and researchers who paid for access to test subjects while providing Samuel with opportunities to advance his own medical knowledge and reputation. The family's willingness to provide detailed documentation of experimental procedures and results made them particularly valuable to clients who required scientific credibility for their research activities. Property crimes committed by children under the family's control provided additional income through theft, fraud, and confidence schemes that exploited the children's apparent innocence and respectability. Children trained in specific criminal techniques could generate substantial profits while the family maintained plausible deniability about their involvement in any illegal activities. Insurance fraud became an increasingly important revenue source as the family developed techniques for documenting false deaths and collecting benefits on policies they had secretly purchased on children in their care. Samuel's medical expertise enabled him to create convincing death certificates, while Isaac's knowledge of disposal methods ensured that bodies were never discovered in ways that might contradict official cause of death determinations. The refinement of security measures reflected the family's growing understanding of the risks associated with their expanded operations and their determination to prevent the kind of exposure that had forced them to abandon previous locations. Physical security improvements included enhanced perimeter barriers, improved locks and restraints, and the construction of specialized facilities designed to prevent escape attempts and muffle sounds that might attract unwanted attention from neighbors or visitors. Operational security measures included the development of code words and communication systems that concealed the true nature of family discussions and correspondence. Emergency protocols were established to handle unexpected visits from authorities or suspicious community members, with specific roles assigned to each family member and predetermined explanations for any unusual circumstances that might be discovered during unscheduled inspections. The family's confidence in their refined methodology led to increasingly ambitious plans for expansion that would ultimately prove to be their downfall, as their success created the very visibility that would eventually attract the attention of individuals capable of recognizing the true nature of their charitable work. The period from late 1865 through 1866 marked the height of the Ravenswood family's operations, as their refined methods and expanded network enabled them to process unprecedented numbers of children while maintaining their reputation as devoted charitable workers. The family's success had attracted attention from officials throughout Pennsylvania and neighboring states, leading to referrals and contracts that brought them children from increasingly distant locations. This expansion provided both greater opportunities for profit and enhanced protection through geographic diversification that made tracking individual cases nearly impossible for anyone outside the operation. The network expansion began with carefully cultivated relationships with officials in county poorhouses, orphanages, and charitable institutions across the region. Samuel Ravenswood's medical reputation provided entry into professional circles where discussions about problem cases and difficult placements created opportunities to offer the family's services as solutions to other institutions' challenges. His willingness to accept children that other facilities refused, combined with his apparent success in managing difficult cases, made him a valuable resource for overwhelmed administrators seeking to reduce their caseloads. Martha Ravenswood's coordination with women's charitable organizations throughout the state created another pipeline for victims, as her reputation for successful child placement attracted referrals from groups struggling to find appropriate homes for war orphans and displaced children. Her ability to provide immediate placement for children who had been waiting months or years for suitable families made her a celebrated figure in charitable circles, with testimonials and recommendations that enhanced the family's credibility and operational reach. The establishment of satellite operations in 3 additional counties provided the family with expanded capacity while distributing risk across multiple locations that could operate independently if problems arose at any single facility. These smaller facilities, typically consisting of converted farmhouses or rural properties managed by trusted associates, specialized in specific types of processing and could accommodate overflow from the main Millbrook operation during periods of high demand. Isaac Ravenswood's transportation network had evolved into a sophisticated logistics operation that could move children, clients, and materials across multiple states while maintaining the appearance of legitimate commercial activity. His partnerships with freight companies, stagecoach operators, and railroad personnel created a distribution system that could deliver children to buyers as far away as New York, Baltimore, and Charleston while providing alibis and documentation that concealed the true nature of these transactions. The family's client base during this peak period included wealthy individuals, medical researchers, industrial enterprises seeking child labor, and criminal organizations that utilized children for various illegal activities. The diversity of demand enabled the family to match specific children to appropriate buyers while maximizing the value extracted from each victim. Premium clients who required ongoing relationships received preferential treatment and access to the most valuable children, while bulk buyers who needed large numbers of workers for industrial or agricultural purposes could purchase less valuable children at reduced prices. If this systematic exploitation of vulnerable children is making you sick, you're having the appropriate human response to one of history's most calculated crimes against innocence. The scope of what this family accomplished through manipulation of charitable institutions should terrify anyone who cares about child welfare. Hit that like button if you think these stories need to be told, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss our investigations into America's darkest chapters. Medical experimentation during this period expanded beyond Samuel's individual research to include partnerships with physicians and researchers from universities and medical colleges throughout the eastern states. The availability of test subjects for studies involving nutrition, disease, psychological conditioning, and surgical procedures generated substantial income while providing Samuel with professional connections that enhanced his medical reputation and protected the family's operations from unwanted scrutiny by authorities. The industrial applications of child labor created another major revenue stream as factory owners and agricultural operations discovered the advantages of workers who could be obtained without legal complications and managed without concern for labor regulations or safety requirements. Children trained in specific industrial skills commanded premium prices, while those suitable only for basic manual labor could still generate profits through volume sales to enterprises that required large numbers of workers for dangerous or unhealthy conditions. Criminal enterprises found children particularly valuable for activities that exploited their apparent innocence and ability to access locations and situations that would be suspicious for adult criminals. Pickpocketing, confidence schemes, burglary, and intelligence gathering became specialized training programs within the Sunday school operation, with successful graduates commanding high prices from criminal organizations that required skilled and reliable operators. The family's documentation systems during this peak period achieved remarkable sophistication, with detailed records that tracked each child's processing, training, placement, and ultimate disposition. Rebecca's administrative skills enabled the maintenance of multiple sets of records designed for different audiences, including official documentation for legal compliance, operational records for internal management, and financial records for tracking revenue and expenses across all aspects of the enterprise. The psychological conditioning programs developed during this period incorporated techniques learned from military training, religious indoctrination, and emerging theories about behavior modification that Samuel encountered through his medical research. Children underwent systematic programs designed to eliminate their previous identities while installing new personalities optimized for their intended roles within the broader operation or their eventual placement with specific buyers. Quality control measures ensured that children delivered to buyers met specified requirements and performed as expected, with guarantees and return policies that protected the family's reputation while maximizing customer satisfaction. Regular follow-up contacts with major clients provided opportunities to identify additional needs while monitoring the performance of delivered children and gathering intelligence about market trends and emerging opportunities. The integration of the expanded operation with legitimate business activities provided cover for the increased financial activity while creating additional revenue streams that could be used to explain the family's growing wealth and influence. Investments in real estate, agricultural enterprises, and commercial ventures provided both operational bases and financial laundering mechanisms that concealed the true sources of the family's income. The peak period success created the very conditions that would eventually lead to the operation's downfall, as the volume of activity and the number of people involved made it increasingly difficult to maintain complete operational security. The family's confidence in their methods and their belief in their own invulnerability would soon be tested by circumstances they had not anticipated and individuals who possessed the determination and resources necessary to uncover the truth about their charitable work. By early 1866, the Ravenswood family's expanded operations had generated the very success that would begin to threaten their continued security, as increased activity created more opportunities for mistakes, witnesses, and uncomfortable questions from individuals who possessed both the intelligence and persistence necessary to recognize patterns that others had missed. The family's confidence in their methods had led to a gradual relaxation of some security measures, while their growing wealth and influence had made them more visible to authorities and community members who were beginning to notice discrepancies between the family's apparent charitable work and their increasingly lavish lifestyle. The first serious close call occurred in March 1866, when Pennsylvania State Board of Charities Inspector Margaret Thornfield arrived at the Sunday school for an unscheduled visit to evaluate the facility's compliance with state regulations governing charitable institutions. Thornfield's reputation for thorough investigations and her background in child welfare made her a particularly dangerous threat to the family's operations, as she possessed both the knowledge necessary to recognize signs of abuse and the authority to initiate official investigations that could expose the true nature of the Ravenswood program. The family's emergency protocols were immediately activated when Isaac spotted Thornfield's carriage approaching the property. Within minutes, children who showed signs of physical abuse or psychological conditioning were moved to concealed areas within the facility, while those who had been trained to interact with visitors were positioned in appropriate locations to demonstrate the program's apparent success. Samuel quickly destroyed medical records that documented experimental procedures, while Rebecca secured documentation that could reveal the true scope of the family's operations. Thornfield's inspection lasted 6 hours and included detailed interviews with children, examination of facilities, and review of administrative records that the family had carefully prepared for such occasions. Her questions demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of child welfare issues and institutional management that forced the Ravenwoods to provide explanations for several aspects of their operation that had never been questioned by previous visitors. The inspector's particular interest in the facility's medical facilities and Samuel's treatment records created additional tension, as she possessed the medical knowledge necessary to identify equipment and procedures that served purposes beyond basic health care. The family's performance during Thornfield's inspection required careful coordination and precise execution of rehearsed responses designed to satisfy official requirements while concealing the operation's true nature. Children selected for interaction with the inspector had been extensively trained to provide specific answers to likely questions, while facility areas open to inspection had been carefully arranged to suggest appropriate educational and charitable activities. Documents provided for review had been prepared months in advance to create the impression of proper administration and regulatory compliance. Ezekiel Ravenswood's handling of Thornfield's theological questions about the program's religious instruction demonstrated his ability to provide orthodox answers while concealing the psychological manipulation and conditioning that actually occurred within the facility. His discussions of curriculum, moral instruction, and spiritual development satisfied the inspector's requirements while revealing nothing about the systematic destruction of children's previous identities and beliefs that was central to the operation's success. The inspection concluded with Thornfield's conditional approval of the facility's continued operation, but her written report included several recommendations for improvements and requirements for additional documentation that suggested she harbored suspicions about aspects of the program she had been unable to investigate thoroughly. Her request for detailed records of all children placed in employment or apprenticeships over the previous 2 years created particular concern, as these records would need to be fabricated to satisfy official requirements while avoiding creation of evidence that could be used against the family in future investigations. The second major security threat emerged in June 1866, when Thomas Brennan, the father of 8-year-old Michael Brennan who had been placed in the Sunday school program 18 months earlier, arrived at the facility demanding to see his son and threatening to involve local authorities if his requests were denied. Brennan's persistent inquiries had been deflected for months with explanations about his son's progress and the importance of avoiding disruptions to the child's educational development, but his growing suspicions and determination to verify his son's welfare created a direct threat to operational security. The family's response to Brennan's demands required immediate implementation of witness elimination protocols that had been developed for such circumstances. Isaac Ravenswood's role in these protocols involved assessment of the threat level and coordination of appropriate responses ranging from bribery and intimidation to more permanent solutions that eliminated sources of unwanted attention. Brennan's isolated circumstances as a widowed immigrant with limited community connections made him a particularly suitable candidate for permanent elimination, as his disappearance could be explained in ways that would not generate extensive investigation or ongoing attention from authorities. The elimination of Thomas Brennan was accomplished through careful planning that made his death appear to be the result of a tragic accident rather than deliberate murder. Isaac's knowledge of local geography and seasonal conditions enabled him to create circumstances that suggested Brennan had fallen through ice while attempting to cross a partially frozen stream during a winter storm. The discovery of Brennan's body 3 days after his visit to the Sunday school was accompanied by evidence that supported the accidental death explanation, including personal effects scattered along the stream bank and physical evidence consistent with an attempt to cross dangerous ice conditions. Samuel Ravenswood's examination of Brennan's body as the local medical authority provided official confirmation of accidental death while eliminating any evidence that might suggest alternative explanations for the man's demise. His death certificate documented drowning as the cause of death with contributing factors that included alcohol consumption and hypothermia, creating an official record that discouraged further investigation while explaining away any physical evidence that might have suggested violence or struggle. The successful elimination of Thomas Brennan demonstrated the family's ability to handle direct threats to their operation while maintaining their public reputation and avoiding unwanted attention from authorities. However, the incident also revealed the increasing risks associated with their expanded operations and the growing likelihood that future threats would be more difficult to manage through traditional security measures. Additional security enhancements implemented following the Brennan incident included improved surveillance systems for early detection of potential threats, enhanced communication protocols for coordinating emergency responses, and expanded networks of corrupt officials who could be relied upon to provide protection or misdirection when circumstances required official intervention. The family also began developing contingency plans for rapid evacuation and operational shutdown that could be implemented if circumstances made continued operation at the Millbrook location impossible. The family's growing paranoia about exposure led to increased internal security measures designed to prevent information leaks from within the operation itself. Children who had been at the facility for extended periods and possessed detailed knowledge of the family's activities faced enhanced monitoring and stricter confinement to prevent potential escape attempts that could result in exposure. Staff members and associates involved in various aspects of the operation were subjected to increased scrutiny and periodic testing to ensure their continued loyalty and discretion. The autumn of 1866 brought the first sustained challenge to the Ravenswood family's operation in the form of Reverend Joshua McClintock, the newly appointed pastor of Millbrook's Second Presbyterian Church, whose background in urban ministry had exposed him to the harsh realities of child exploitation and institutional corruption that his rural colleagues had never encountered. McClintock's arrival in Millbrook was part of a broader Presbyterian initiative to strengthen rural congregations through the placement of experienced ministers with specialized training in social welfare and community development, making him uniquely qualified to recognize the inconsistencies and warning signs that others had overlooked. McClintock's suspicions began with seemingly minor observations that accumulated over several months of ministry in the Millbrook community. His pastoral visits to families throughout the region brought him into contact with parents and relatives who expressed concerns about children who had been placed in the Ravenswood program months or years earlier without any subsequent contact or information about their welfare. These conversations revealed patterns of isolation and communication restrictions that seemed excessive even by the standards of institutional child care during the 1860s. The new pastor's theological training included extensive study of child development and educational theory that enabled him to recognize the psychological techniques being employed at the Sunday school program as inconsistent with accepted practices for moral instruction and behavioral modification. His observations during community events where Ravenswood children were present revealed signs of psychological conditioning and fear responses that suggested systematic abuse rather than appropriate disciplinary measures. McClintock's investigation began informally through increased pastoral attention to families who had placed children in the Ravenswood program, offering counseling and support that encouraged parents to discuss their concerns and share information about their experiences with the Sunday school administration. These conversations revealed a pattern of manipulation and intimidation designed to discourage parental contact and suppress questions about children's welfare that violated both accepted practices and legal requirements for charitable institutions. The pastor's growing concerns led him to begin maintaining detailed records of all information he gathered about the Ravenswood operation, including names and ages of children who had been placed in the program, dates of placement, family circumstances that led to placement decisions, and any subsequent information about the children's welfare or disposition. This documentation process revealed discrepancies between the number of children known to have been placed in the program and the number who could be accounted for through official records or family reports. McClintock's background in urban ministry had exposed him to the realities of human trafficking and child exploitation that operated under the cover of charitable institutions, giving him the knowledge necessary to recognize the warning signs and operational patterns that characterized such enterprises. His experience with corrupt officials and compromised institutions also provided him with understanding of the investigative techniques and security measures necessary to gather evidence without alerting the subjects of his investigation to his activities. The pastor's investigation strategy involved careful cultivation of relationships with families, community members, and officials who possessed information relevant to the Ravenswood operation while avoiding direct confrontation or obvious inquiry that might alert the family to his growing suspicions. His position within the community provided natural opportunities to gather information through pastoral visits, community meetings, and religious activities that would not attract attention from the Ravenswood family or their associates. If you're wondering how a single pastor could challenge such a sophisticated criminal enterprise, remember that throughout history, it has often been ordinary individuals with extraordinary courage who exposed the greatest evils. McClintock's determination to protect children represents the kind of moral courage that makes real change possible. Share this video with someone who believes that one person can make a difference, and hit that subscribe button to join our community of truth seekers who refuse to let these stories be forgotten. McClintock's investigation received unexpected assistance in December 1866 when he encountered Sarah Mitchell, a 15-year-old girl who had escaped from the Ravenswood facility 3 weeks earlier and had been surviving in the woods surrounding Millbrook while attempting to reach relatives in a neighboring county. Sarah's appearance at the church during a winter storm provided McClintock with his first direct witness to the conditions and activities within the Sunday school program, though her traumatized state and fear of recapture initially made her reluctant to provide detailed information about her experiences. The pastor's patient work with Sarah over several weeks gradually revealed the scope and nature of the Ravenswood operation, including details about the facility's internal organization, the treatment of children, the various categories of exploitation, and the security measures designed to prevent escape or communication with outside authorities. Sarah's information provided crucial intelligence about the facility's physical layout, daily routines, and personnel that would be essential for any future intervention or rescue operation. Sarah's testimony also revealed the existence of other children within the facility who possessed detailed knowledge of the operation and might be willing to provide additional evidence if they could be safely contacted and protected from retaliation. Her descriptions of the psychological conditioning and physical abuse used to control children provided McClintock with understanding of the challenges that would face any rescue effort and the specialized care that survivors would require. The pastor's documentation of Sarah's testimony created the first comprehensive record of the Ravenswood family's criminal activities that could potentially be used as evidence in legal proceedings, though the challenges of protecting Sarah while gathering additional evidence and building a case that could withstand the family's wealth and influence presented enormous obstacles to achieving justice through official channels. McClintock's investigation also revealed the extent of the Ravenswood family's integration into local power structures and their relationships with officials who might be expected to investigate allegations of criminal activity. The discovery that several county officials had financial relationships with the family or had received substantial donations for their political campaigns created additional complications for any attempt to pursue justice through traditional legal channels. The pastor's growing understanding of the scope and sophistication of the Ravenswood operation led him to recognize that exposing their crimes would require careful planning, extensive evidence gathering, and coordination with authorities outside the local area who were not compromised by relationships with the family. His investigation had revealed a criminal enterprise that extended far beyond simple child abuse to include murder, human trafficking, medical experimentation, and corruption of public officials on a scale that demanded intervention by state or federal authorities. The challenge facing McClintock was how to gather sufficient evidence to support criminal charges while protecting Sarah and other potential witnesses from retaliation, and how to present that evidence to authorities who possessed both the jurisdiction and the integrity necessary to pursue justice against such a well-connected and dangerous criminal organization. The pastor's investigation had revealed the true nature of the Ravenswood operation, but exposing their crimes would require resources and support that exceeded what any individual minister could provide through his own efforts. The winter months of 1867 marked a crucial period in McClintock's investigation as Sarah Mitchell's recovery enabled her to provide increasingly detailed testimony about the internal operations of the Ravenswood facility, while the pastor's careful documentation and evidence gathering created a compelling case that demanded action from authorities beyond the compromised local officials. Sarah's detailed knowledge of the facility's layout, daily routines, and security measures provided McClintock with intelligence that would be essential for any rescue operation, while her first-hand accounts of the abuse and exploitation she had witnessed created powerful evidence of systematic criminal activity. Sarah's testimony revealed that the Ravenswood facility housed approximately 40 children at any given time, though the population fluctuated as new arrivals were processed and existing children were sold to buyers or eliminated when they became liabilities to the operation. Her descriptions of the categorization system used to classify children according to their intended exploitation provided McClintock with understanding of the sophisticated business model that drove the family's criminal enterprise, including the economic factors that determined each child's fate within the operation. The evidence-gathering process required McClintock to balance the need for comprehensive documentation with the security requirements necessary to protect Sarah and prevent the Ravenswood family from discovering his investigation. The pastor's careful approach involved creating multiple copies of all evidence and establishing secure communication channels with officials in Harrisburg who possessed both the authority and the integrity necessary to pursue justice against such a well-connected criminal organization. McClintock's correspondence with Pennsylvania Attorney General James Morrison revealed the scope of the challenge facing any official investigation of the Ravenswood operation, as the family's wealth and political connections had created a network of protection that extended throughout the county and into state government. Morrison's response to McClintock's initial inquiries indicated that previous allegations against charitable institutions had been suppressed through political pressure and financial influence, making it essential to develop an overwhelming case before any public action could be taken. The pastor's investigation received crucial support in February 1867 when Morrison arranged for Detective Inspector William Crawford of the Pennsylvania State Police to conduct a covert assessment of the situation in Millbrook County. Crawford's arrival was coordinated through McClintock's church activities to avoid attracting attention from the Ravenswood family or their local associates, while his extensive experience with organized criminal enterprises provided the specialized knowledge necessary to evaluate the evidence and develop an effective intervention strategy. Crawford's initial assessment confirmed McClintock's conclusions about the scope and sophistication of the Ravenswood operation, while his professional expertise identified additional evidence sources and investigative techniques that could strengthen the case against the family. The detective's recognition of the operation's similarities to criminal enterprises he had encountered in urban areas provided crucial validation of McClintock's concerns and established the foundation for a coordinated law enforcement response. The collaboration between McClintock and Crawford led to the development of a comprehensive investigation strategy that involved surveillance of the Ravenswood facility, identification of additional witnesses, documentation of the family's financial activities, and coordination with federal authorities who possessed jurisdiction over interstate criminal enterprises. The investigation's expansion beyond local boundaries reflected the scope of the Ravenswood operation and the resources necessary to achieve justice for their victims. Sarah Mitchell's continued recovery enabled her to provide increasingly specific information about other children within the facility who might be willing to serve as witnesses if they could be safely contacted and protected from retaliation. Her knowledge of the facility's internal communication systems and security protocols provided Crawford with the intelligence necessary to plan potential rescue operations while minimizing risks to the children still trapped within the operation. The investigation revealed evidence of the Ravenswood family's growing paranoia about exposure and their implementation of enhanced security measures designed to prevent escapes and eliminate potential witnesses. Sarah's reports about increased surveillance within the facility and more severe punishments for children who showed signs of resistance indicated that the family's confidence in their security had been shaken by her successful escape and their inability to recapture her. Crawford's surveillance of the facility documented patterns of activity that supported Sarah's testimony while providing additional evidence of criminal behavior that could be used in legal proceedings. The detective's observations of unusual traffic patterns, suspicious deliveries, and the arrival of individuals who matched descriptions of known criminal associates confirmed the operation's connections to broader criminal networks operating throughout the region. The investigation also revealed evidence of recent murders committed by the Ravenswood family to eliminate threats to their operation, including the suspicious death of Thomas Brennan and several other individuals who had asked uncomfortable questions about missing children. Crawford's analysis of these deaths identified patterns of evidence manipulation and official corruption that demonstrated the family's willingness to commit murder to protect their criminal enterprise. The accumulation of evidence during the winter investigation period created a compelling case against the Ravenswood family that included documentation of murder, human trafficking, child abuse, medical experimentation, and corruption of public officials. However, the family's wealth and political connections continued to present significant obstacles to achieving justice through official channels, while their growing awareness of external threats made immediate action increasingly urgent to prevent additional murders and protect potential witnesses. McClintock's recognition that the Ravenswood family had become aware of the investigation created additional urgency for the rescue operation, as Sarah's information indicated that children within the facility were facing increased danger as the family prepared to eliminate evidence and witnesses who could testify against them. The pastor's growing fear that delay would result in additional murders led him to press Crawford and Morrison for immediate action despite the risks associated with premature intervention. The investigation had reached a critical juncture where the accumulated evidence demanded action, but the risks associated with intervention had increased dramatically as the Ravenswood family implemented desperate measures to protect their operation from exposure. The challenge facing McClintock, Crawford, and Morrison was how to coordinate a rescue operation that could save the children while preserving the evidence necessary to achieve justice against their captors, knowing that the family's desperation made them increasingly dangerous to both their victims and anyone who threatened their continued operation. The confrontation that would ultimately expose the Ravenswood family's criminal enterprise began in early March 1867, when Isaac Ravenswood's surveillance network detected unusual activity around the property that suggested their operation was under investigation by individuals with professional law enforcement capabilities. The family's security protocols immediately shifted to emergency status as they prepared to implement contingency plans designed to eliminate evidence and witnesses while creating opportunities for escape to predetermined safe locations outside Pennsylvania. The family's growing desperation became evident through their increasingly reckless attempts to silence potential witnesses and destroy evidence of their criminal activities. Samuel Ravenswood's efforts to eliminate medical records and experimental documentation created suspicious activity that attracted additional attention from Crawford's surveillance team, while Rebecca's frantic destruction of administrative records generated unusual smoke patterns that could be observed from considerable distances around the property. Ezekiel Ravenswood's attempts to maintain normal community relations while preparing for emergency evacuation created additional strain on the family's operational security, as his obvious nervousness and uncharacteristic behavior during church services and community meetings attracted comments from congregation members who had known him for years. His inability to maintain his usual charismatic demeanor while dealing with the stress of potential exposure created the very visibility he was attempting to avoid. Martha Ravenswood's coordination of the cover-up effort required her to make contact with corrupt officials and criminal associates throughout the region, creating a communication pattern that Crawford's team was able to monitor and document as evidence of the broader criminal network supporting the family's operations. Her desperation to secure protection and assistance led to conversations that revealed details about the operation's scope and the identities of other individuals involved in child trafficking and exploitation. The family's decision to accelerate the elimination of children who possessed detailed knowledge of their criminal activities created the urgent crisis that forced McClintock and Crawford to abandon their careful investigation strategy in favor of immediate intervention. Sarah Mitchell's intelligence about the facility's internal security and her knowledge of which children were at immediate risk provided the information necessary to plan a rescue operation under extremely dangerous circumstances. Crawford's coordination with federal authorities brought additional resources to the intervention effort, including U.S. Marshals who possessed the jurisdiction and authority necessary to override local corruption and political interference. The federal involvement reflected the interstate nature of the Ravenswood operation and the evidence of systematic violations of federal laws governing child welfare and human trafficking that had been documented during the investigation. The discovery of Isaac Ravenswood's disposal sites during the investigation provided crucial physical evidence that corroborated Sarah's testimony while revealing the full scope of the family's murderous activities over their years of operation. Crawford's team located multiple burial sites on properties controlled by the family, with forensic examination revealing evidence of systematic murder that included children, adults who had threatened the operation, and individuals who had been eliminated to prevent testimony against the family. The family's attempt to implement their escape plan was disrupted by coordinated law enforcement action that simultaneously targeted the main facility and the satellite operations that had been identified during the investigation. The timing of the intervention was crucial, as evidence indicated that the family had begun eliminating children they considered security risks and preparing to abandon the Millbrook location permanently within days of the rescue operation. The confrontation at the main facility resulted in the capture of Samuel and Rebecca Ravenswood, though Ezekiel and Martha managed to escape during the initial confusion and remained at large for several weeks before being apprehended by federal marshals. Isaac Ravenswood's attempt to destroy evidence by setting fire to several buildings resulted in his death when he became trapped in a storage facility containing medical supplies and experimental equipment. The rescue of 37 children from the facility revealed the horrific conditions and systematic abuse that characterized daily life under the Ravenswood family's control, with many survivors requiring extensive medical treatment and psychological care to address the trauma they had experienced. The children's testimony provided additional evidence against the family while revealing details about the operation that had not been documented through previous investigation efforts. The immediate aftermath of the rescue operation included the discovery of detailed records that the family had been unable to destroy during their hasty cover-up attempt, providing comprehensive documentation of their criminal activities that included victim identifications, financial records, client lists, and correspondence with criminal associates throughout the region. These records revealed the true scope of the operation and provided evidence necessary to pursue charges against the broader network of individuals who had supported and profited from the family's crimes. The arrest of corrupt local officials who had protected the Ravenswood operation demonstrated the extent of institutional corruption that had enabled the family's crimes to continue for years without interference from law enforcement. The revelation that several county officials had received substantial payments in exchange for protection and false documentation created a scandal that extended far beyond the immediate criminal charges against the family members. The family's attempt to claim that their activities constituted legitimate charitable work was immediately contradicted by the physical evidence discovered at the facility and the testimony of surviving children who described the systematic abuse, exploitation, and murder they had witnessed. Samuel Ravenswood's claim that his medical experiments served scientific purposes was refuted by expert analysis that revealed procedures designed to cause suffering rather than advance medical knowledge. The discovery of the burial grounds behind the facility provided the final confirmation of the operation's murderous nature, with forensic examination revealing evidence of systematic killing that had continued throughout the family's years in Millbrook. The recovery of remains from 143 children provided physical evidence that corroborated the testimony of survivors while revealing the full scope of the tragedy that had unfolded under the cover of charitable work. The exposure of the Ravenswood family's crimes created a crisis of confidence in charitable institutions throughout Pennsylvania and neighboring states, as officials struggled to address the implications of such systematic abuse occurring under official oversight and community support. The case revealed fundamental weaknesses in the systems designed to protect vulnerable children and highlighted the dangers of institutional corruption that prioritized reputation over child welfare. The comprehensive evidence compiled against the Ravenswood family during the weeks following their capture painted a picture of systematic criminality that shocked even experienced law enforcement officials who had dealt with the worst aspects of human behavior throughout their careers. The detailed documentation recovered from the facility, combined with testimony from surviving children and physical evidence from multiple burial sites, created an overwhelming case that demonstrated the scope and sophistication of what prosecutors would later describe as one of the most heinous criminal enterprises in American history. Detective Inspector Crawford's final report documented the recovery of detailed financial records that revealed the operation's extraordinary profitability, with evidence indicating that the family had generated over $50,000 in revenue during their 4 years in Millbrook through the sale of children, medical experimentation, insurance fraud, and various other criminal activities. The financial documentation also revealed the extensive network of corrupt officials, criminal associates, and wealthy clients who had supported and profited from the family's activities throughout multiple states. The forensic examination of the burial sites conducted by state medical authorities provided definitive evidence of the systematic murder that had characterized the Ravenswood operation, with expert analysis revealing evidence of various methods of killing that included poisoning, strangulation, beating, and medical procedures that were designed to cause death rather than provide treatment. The condition of the remains and the careful organization of the burial sites demonstrated the methodical nature of the killings and the family's experience with disposing of victims. Attorney General Morrison's coordination with federal prosecutors resulted in charges that included murder, kidnapping, human trafficking, mail fraud, conspiracy, and violations of federal laws governing interstate commerce and child welfare. The decision to pursue federal charges reflected both the interstate nature of the operation and the extent of local corruption that had protected the family from state and county law enforcement for years. The testimony of surviving children provided heartbreaking evidence of the systematic abuse and psychological conditioning that had characterized daily life within the facility, with detailed accounts of the various forms of exploitation, the methods used to control and manipulate victims, and the constant threat of violence that maintained order within the operation. The children's descriptions of the selection processes, training programs, and disposal methods corroborated the physical evidence while providing insights into the family's methods that could not be obtained through documentation alone. Sarah Mitchell's role as the primary witness against the family required extensive protection efforts as defense attorneys attempted to discredit her testimony and identify weaknesses in her account of the operation's activities. Her detailed knowledge of the facility's operations and her ability to provide specific information about dates, locations, and individuals involved in various crimes made her testimony crucial to the prosecution's case, while her obvious trauma and continuing fear of retaliation created compelling evidence of the abuse she had suffered. The escape attempts by Ezekiel and Martha Ravenswood demonstrated their desperation and their understanding that the evidence against them would result in death sentences if they were captured and tried for their crimes. Ezekiel's flight to New York and Martha's attempt to reach Canada through established networks of criminal associates revealed the extent of their preparation for emergency evacuation and their connections to broader criminal organizations that operated throughout North America. The capture of Ezekiel Ravenswood in April 1867 was accomplished through federal marshals who had tracked him to a boarding house in Lower Manhattan where he was attempting to secure passage on a ship bound for Europe. His arrest revealed additional evidence of the operation's financial scope, including bank accounts, property deeds, and business investments that had been used to launder money generated through criminal activities over many years of operation. Martha Ravenswood's apprehension near the Canadian border provided the final piece of the prosecution's case against the family, as her capture led to the recovery of additional documentation that revealed details about the operation's clients, criminal associates, and financial arrangements that had not been discovered during the initial investigation. Her possession of detailed records about buyers and criminal partnerships demonstrated the systematic nature of the enterprise and provided evidence necessary to pursue charges against other individuals involved in the broader network. The trial preparation process revealed the extraordinary scope of the investigation required to address all aspects of the Ravenswood operation, with prosecutors coordinating evidence from multiple states and numerous law enforcement agencies to build comprehensive cases against each family member. The complexity of the charges and the volume of evidence created logistical challenges that required unprecedented coordination between federal, state, and local authorities. This systematic destruction of innocent lives under the guise of Christian charity represents one of the most calculated betrayals of trust in American history. If you're feeling overwhelmed by the scope of this family's crimes, remember that exposing these stories honors the memory of their victims and helps prevent future tragedies. Hit that like button if you believe these children deserve to be remembered, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss our investigations into America's darkest chapters. The public revelation of the Ravenswood crimes created a media sensation that attracted national attention to the failures of oversight systems and the dangers posed by corrupt charitable institutions. Newspaper coverage throughout Pennsylvania and neighboring states detailed the horror of the discoveries while raising uncomfortable questions about how such systematic abuse could continue for years without detection by authorities responsible for child welfare. The impact on the Millbrook community was devastating, as residents struggled to understand how they had been deceived by individuals they had trusted and supported for years. The revelation that their donations and volunteer efforts had supported a criminal enterprise rather than genuine charitable work created feelings of guilt and betrayal that would affect the community for generations. The investigation's expansion to include examination of other charitable institutions throughout the region revealed additional cases of abuse and corruption that had been concealed through similar methods of institutional manipulation and official protection. The Ravenswood case became a catalyst for broader reforms in child welfare oversight and charitable institution regulation that addressed systemic weaknesses that had enabled such crimes. The surviving children's need for extensive medical treatment and psychological rehabilitation highlighted the long-term consequences of systematic abuse and the challenges facing society in addressing the trauma inflicted by such criminal enterprises. The establishment of specialized care facilities and treatment programs for the survivors required unprecedented cooperation between medical professionals, religious organizations, and government agencies committed to providing appropriate support for the victims. The evidence compilation process revealed connections between the Ravenswood operation and similar criminal enterprises operating in other states, suggesting that their activities were part of a broader pattern of organized crime that exploited charitable institutions and vulnerable children throughout the United States during the post-Civil War period. The pursuit of justice for the Ravenswood family's victims required unprecedented coordination between federal prosecutors, state authorities, and local officials committed to ensuring that the scope of the crimes would not be minimized through plea bargaining or political interference. The trials, which began in September 1867, attracted national attention as the full extent of the family's criminal enterprise was revealed through weeks of testimony that documented for years of systematic murder, abuse, and exploitation conducted under the protection of charitable institution status. Federal Prosecutor James Harrison's opening statement outlined charges that included the murder of 143 children, the kidnapping and trafficking of hundreds of additional victims, conspiracy to defraud charitable institutions, mail fraud, and violations of federal commerce laws related to interstate criminal enterprises. The prosecution's case was built on physical evidence, financial records, survivor testimony, and documentation recovered from the facility that created an overwhelming picture of calculated criminality extending far beyond individual acts of violence. The testimony of surviving children provided the most compelling evidence against the family, with detailed accounts of daily life within the facility that revealed the systematic nature of the abuse and the sophisticated methods used to control and exploit victims. Sarah Mitchell's testimony lasted 3 days and included detailed descriptions of the selection processes, training programs, client interactions, and disposal methods that characterized the operation's various revenue streams. Samuel Ravenswood's defense strategy attempted to portray his medical experiments as legitimate scientific research conducted with appropriate consent and oversight, but expert medical testimony demolished these claims by demonstrating that his procedures were designed to cause suffering and death rather than advance medical knowledge. The prosecution's presentation of Samuel's detailed experimental records revealed procedures that violated every accepted standard of medical ethics and legal requirements for patient care. Rebecca Ravenswood's trial focused on her role in the administrative and financial aspects of the operation, with prosecutors presenting evidence that she had maintained detailed records of victim processing, client relationships, and financial transactions that demonstrated her central role in coordinating the family's criminal activities. Her defense attorney's attempts to portray her as a subordinate figure controlled by her male relatives were contradicted by evidence showing her initiative in developing operational procedures and expanding the enterprise's scope. Ezekiel Ravenswood's trial received the most public attention due to his prominent role as a religious leader and the betrayal of trust that his crimes represented to communities throughout the region. The prosecution's presentation of evidence showing how he had exploited his religious authority to gain access to victims and manipulate families into surrendering their children created public outrage that extended far beyond Pennsylvania's borders. Martha Ravenswood's defense strategy attempted to claim that she had been coerced into participation by her husband's threats and violence, but prosecution evidence revealed her active role in developing victim selection criteria, coordinating with buyers, and managing the day-to-day operations that made the enterprise profitable. Her detailed knowledge of financial arrangements and client relationships demonstrated her central role in the operation's success rather than passive victimization. The revelation of the broader criminal network that had supported and profited from the Ravenswood operation led to additional prosecutions throughout Pennsylvania and neighboring states as authorities pursued charges against corrupt officials, criminal associates, and clients who had purchased children or services from the family. The investigation's expansion revealed the extent of institutional corruption that had protected the operation while demonstrating the interstate scope of organized child trafficking during the post-Civil War period. The trials also revealed evidence of similar operations that had been conducted by the family in previous locations, with testimony from witnesses in Ohio, Maryland, and Virginia documenting criminal activities that had continued for over a decade before their arrival in Millbrook. The pattern of establishing charitable institutions as covers for criminal enterprises suggested systematic planning and experience that made their Pennsylvania operation particularly sophisticated and profitable. Expert testimony from medical professionals, child welfare specialists, and law enforcement officials provided context for understanding the scope and significance of the crimes while educating the public about the methods used by criminal enterprises to exploit charitable institutions and vulnerable populations. The testimony revealed systemic weaknesses in oversight and regulation that had enabled such operations to continue without detection by authorities responsible for child protection. The financial investigation revealed that the family had accumulated substantial wealth through their criminal activities, with assets including real estate, business investments, and bank accounts that totaled over $100,000 at the time of their arrest. The prosecution's presentation of financial evidence demonstrated the profitability of their criminal enterprise while providing assets that could be used to compensate survivors and support rehabilitation programs. The defense attorney's attempts to minimize the charges through claims of mental illness, religious delusion, or social necessity were systematically refuted by expert testimony that demonstrated the calculated and systematic nature of the crimes. The evidence of careful planning, sophisticated operational procedures, and methodical evidence destruction contradicted any suggestion that the family's actions resulted from impaired judgment or external compulsion. The public reaction to the trial proceedings included demands for comprehensive reform of charitable institution oversight and regulation that would prevent similar crimes from occurring in other locations. The revelation that such systematic abuse could continue for years under official oversight created public pressure for legislative changes that would strengthen protection for vulnerable children and increase accountability for charitable organizations. The impact on surviving children required ongoing attention throughout the trial period, as their testimony about traumatic experiences created additional psychological stress that complicated their recovery process. The establishment of specialized support services for the survivors demonstrated society's recognition of the long-term consequences of systematic abuse and the resources required to address the damage inflicted by such criminal enterprises. The trials concluded in December 1867 with convictions on all major charges against each surviving family member, with death sentences imposed on Ezekiel, Samuel, and Martha Ravenswood for their roles in the murders of 143 children. Rebecca Ravenswood received a life sentence due to her age and the possibility that she had been influenced by older family members, though evidence suggested she had been an active and willing participant in the operation's criminal activities. The broader investigation continued beyond the family's convictions as authorities pursued charges against the criminal network that had supported their operations, leading to additional trials and convictions that revealed the extent of organized crime involvement in child trafficking and institutional corruption during the post-Civil War period. The execution of Ezekiel, Samuel, and Martha Ravenswood in March 1868 marked the end of one of America's most systematic campaigns of child murder, but the legacy of their crimes would influence child welfare policy and charitable institution oversight for generations to come. The public hanging, attended by thousands of spectators from throughout Pennsylvania and neighboring states, represented society's demand for justice while providing closure for communities that had been deceived and traumatized by the family's betrayal of trust and exploitation of charitable impulses. The aftermath of the Ravenswood case led to comprehensive reforms in Pennsylvania's charitable institution oversight system, with new legislation requiring regular inspections, detailed reporting, and independent verification of all claims about child placement and welfare. The reforms also established legal requirements for maintaining contact between charitable institutions and the families of children in their care, eliminating the isolation tactics that had enabled the Ravenswood operation to continue without detection for years. The surviving children from the Ravenswood facility faced years of rehabilitation and recovery, with many requiring extensive medical treatment and psychological care to address the trauma they had experienced during their captivity. The establishment of specialized care facilities funded through the seizure of Ravenswood assets provided comprehensive support services while pioneering new approaches to treating victims of systematic abuse that would influence child welfare practices throughout the United States. Sarah Mitchell's courage in escaping from the facility and providing testimony that exposed the family's crimes made her a symbol of survival and resistance that inspired other victims of abuse to come forward and seek justice. Her continued advocacy for child welfare reform and her work with other survivors demonstrated the possibility of recovery and meaningful life after systematic trauma, though she would struggle with the psychological effects of her experiences for the remainder of her life. Reverend Joshua McClintock's investigation and his coordination with law enforcement authorities established new models for community involvement in child protection that emphasized the responsibility of individuals to recognize and report signs of institutional abuse. His continued ministry in the Millbrook community focused on rebuilding trust and addressing the collective trauma that had resulted from the community's unwitting support of a criminal enterprise disguised as charitable work. Detective Inspector William Crawford's investigation methods and coordination with federal authorities created precedents for multi-jurisdictional cooperation in cases involving organized crime and institutional corruption. His detailed documentation of the Ravenswood operations methods and network connections provided law enforcement agencies throughout the United States with intelligence that led to the discovery and prosecution of similar criminal enterprises operating under charitable covers. The broader investigation's revelation of corrupt officials and criminal networks led to prosecutions that extended throughout Pennsylvania and into neighboring states, with over 30 individuals ultimately convicted of charges related to child trafficking, official corruption, and conspiracy. The scope of these prosecutions demonstrated the extent of organized criminal involvement in exploiting charitable institutions while revealing systemic weaknesses that had enabled such operations to flourish. The impact on the Millbrook community required years of healing and rebuilding, as residents struggled to understand how they had been deceived and to address the guilt associated with their unwitting support of criminal activities. The establishment of memorial services for the victims and the creation of educational programs about recognizing signs of institutional abuse helped the community process their trauma while working to prevent similar tragedies in the future. The financial investigation revealed assets that enabled substantial compensation for surviving victims while funding the establishment of specialized treatment facilities and educational programs designed to prevent similar crimes. The Ravenswood property was converted into a memorial park and educational center that honored the victims while providing resources for communities seeking to strengthen their child protection systems. The case's influence on federal legislation included new laws governing interstate commerce in child welfare services and enhanced penalties for crimes involving the exploitation of charitable institutions. The legislation also established federal oversight mechanisms for charitable organizations that served vulnerable populations, creating accountability systems designed to prevent the institutional corruption that had enabled the Ravenswood operation. Medical professionals throughout the United States studied the evidence of Samuel Ravenswood's experimental procedures to understand the psychological and physical effects of systematic abuse while developing improved treatment methods for victims of institutional trauma. The documentation of his crimes provided crucial evidence about the long-term consequences of child abuse that influence both medical practice and legal approaches to prosecuting such cases. Rebecca Ravenswood's life sentence was served in the Pennsylvania State Penitentiary for Women, where she died in 1891 without ever expressing remorse for her role in the murders of 143 children. Her refusal to cooperate with ongoing investigations or provide information about other victims suggested that the full scope of the family's crimes might never be completely understood. The legacy of the Ravenswood case extends far beyond the immediate tragedy of their victims, as the reforms and awareness generated by their prosecution helped establish modern child protection systems and charitable institution oversight mechanisms. The case demonstrated both the vulnerability of charitable institutions to criminal exploitation and the possibility of achieving justice through determined investigation and community cooperation. What do you think about this horrifying chapter in American history? The systematic exploitation of charitable impulses and the murder of innocent children represents one of humanity's darkest possibilities, but the courage of individuals like Sarah Mitchell and Reverend McClintock shows that evil can be exposed and justice can prevail. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss our investigations into the forgotten crimes that shaped American history. The memorial established for the 143 victims serves as a permanent reminder of the importance of vigilance in protecting vulnerable children and the responsibility of communities to question institutions that claim to serve charitable purposes. The names of the victims, recovered through the patient work of investigators and the testimony of survivors, are preserved to ensure that their lives and suffering are not forgotten by future generations. The Ravenswood case remains a landmark in American criminal justice history, demonstrating both the potential for systematic evil to hide behind charitable facades and the power of determined individuals to expose truth and achieve justice for the innocent. The lessons learned from their crimes continue to influence child welfare policy and institutional oversight more than a century and a half after their execution, ensuring that their victims' suffering contributed to the protection of countless other children who might otherwise have faced similar fates.